Well, my friends, the time has come at last to tell the final story from my very long Vampire the Masquerade campaign, San Andreas by Night. And it is the story of Gehenna.
The bad guy. We won't need eyes to see.
Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies. Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes.
The dead rising from the grave. Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
After going through 70 years of history in Southern California, we finally arrived in 1999. And what better way to end such a long and complicated and insane as fuck campaign as this one has been than with the long prophesized end of days. So what is Gehenna? I'll give a quick explanation of what Gehenna is, like in the meta plot game lore, what it was kind of in the meta level of the real world, and then how I chose to approach it. So in the lore of Vampire the Masquerade, Gehenna is the vampire apocalypse. Now, there's a lot of different opinions about what exactly Gehenna is, or how exactly it works, or whether it exists at all, but the basic premise is that originally there was one vampire, sometimes called Cain, and he made a second generation of vampires, who apparently were a bunch of dicks, and then they made a third generation of vampires. That third generation, who were called the Antediluvians, were at some point long ago very jealous, and they then literally ate their parents. This made Cain very sad, and he went off to live in a shitty apartment someplace and eat oatmeal for the rest of time. By the way, if you've never seen the movie He Never Died with Henry Rollins, really interesting movie. I liked it, and 100% that is the way that I choose to imagine that Cain, if he ever existed, is still living in the world today.
Now you should go sit over with your coworkers.
Why?
You'll understand in a minute.
Eventually, these antediluvians all went to sleep. A few of them are dead, but most of them, after a few thousand years, were just kind of like...
Mother, when you see this videotape, you'll know that I left. Not out of cowardice, but out of... Oh man, it's tired in here.
But one day, inevitably, they are going to wake up. And if you know anything about the habits of petulant apex predators, it's that after sleeping for 90% of the day, they like to wake up, eat, and destroy a bunch of shit. And that is exactly what everyone is afraid of is going to happen when the antediluvians finally wake up. They will devour all the vampires, maybe also all the humans, ruin the world, and it will be a super bad time for everyone. Now, in the real world, Gehenna became a method by which White Wolf tried to shift their fan base from the old world of darkness to the new world of darkness. See, the economic realities of tabletop games are that over time, people stop buying books. So you need to figure out a way to get your player base to re-buy the same books. The way you do this is by releasing a new edition of the game, the same game with slightly changed rules, new art, and all of the text paraphrased into something which is basically the same, but also basically different. But as butthurt as D&D fans get over their new editions, the Vampire fanbase was arguably even more upset with changing Vampire editions, because White Wolf didn't just release a new version of the game with new rules, they published the End of Days, destroyed the entire world, and ended all of the ongoing storylines in their universe. People did not like it.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
Gehenna was not the only reason that White Wolf kind of failed as a company, but it did play a substantial role in the collapse of Vampire. It's a setting that was, at one time, the most popular tabletop role-playing property that had ever existed, more popular even than Dungeons & Dragons, and now it's just nothing like what it was. Even with the recent resurgence of 5th edition, it's a very small fraction of the influence that it once had on the hobby. Part of that is because D&D is such a grotesque monopoly that destroys the entire hobby and a constant desire to obliterate all competition. but it's also because White Wolf really shot themselves in the foot with the way they chose to switch editions by wiping out all the continuity and history of a universe that their entire fan base was deeply invested in. Now, when I was running this campaign, I decided to treat Gehenna not as a world-ending event, but more as a cyclical, destructive period. I even had several of the NPCs, those who were old enough to remember similar events in the past, mention that Gehenna is something that occurs periodically. The Kindred world goes through massive upheavals and destructions, but it's not completely eradicated, it just changes into something new. The fall of the first city, the fall of the second city, the fall of Carthage and the Roman Empire, the Anarch Revolt, these were all tumultuous times. These were Gehennas of their own, and this is another one, but while a lot of vampires will die, it's not the end of the world. We're just shifting into a new era. This is because by this point I already knew that I would want to run future vampire games, and so I didn't want to end the campaign by saying, that's it guys, the whole world was destroyed. I wanted to be able to come back to the world and run a game in the current setting of Vampire. So, kind of similar to what 5th edition has retroactively done, where they pretend that, don't worry guys, Gehenna didn't really happen, even though it did, and it's still happening right now, but it's not real, but it is, but it didn't happen, but it did. Which is very confusing. I decided instead that I would just have Gehenna and not destroy the entire world, or kill all vampires. That way, you know, you could keep playing the game. Do you remember in Fallout 3 when you ended the game and you're like, wow, that ending was garbage. At least I can still play the game. And the game was like, no, you can't. Yeah, that's basically what happened with White Wolf. So instead, we would do a slightly less shit ending and still be able to play the game. So taking inspiration from the various different plot lines of Gehenna that were published officially, and other fan theories and suppositions that I've heard over the years, and also just the various things that my players had been doing in the campaign, and kind of thinking about how I would prefer the setting to be created and set up in the future for my future games, what things I would like to have the same or different. Like, do I still want a Sabbat? Do I want the Tremere to still be the way that they are? Do I, for some reason, still think that the Ravnos are a good idea? I sort of shaped my own version of Gehenna. Or, more specifically, my own 6 versions of Gehenna, because I created a different Gehenna storyline for each of my player characters that they could run through, as they all scattered across the world. Each one of them taking with them a group of NPCs, so that while they would be the protagonist of that storyline, there would be a bunch of other NPCs around who the other players at the table could control during that part of the story, so that they were also involved. Or, as Cassandra described it, you get a Gehenna plot line. You get a Gehenna plot line. Everybody gets a Gehenna plot line. So anyway, Gehenna. In the year 1999, we begin at the Asylum, where Iggy the Malkavian is outside muttering about the end of the world, and Dripsnot and Peepers are discussing how they're going to hide another garden gnome in Dr. Carter's new mansion. Laszlo's telling a story about a town he ran into that was completely overrun with mutants, while Wise Old Owl mixes up some drinks and reminisces about Simon the Devious. Adrian Pimento explains to Jimmy the Saint his rules about killing kids, and Max Hammer talks to himself in the mirror, wondering about those missing high school kids, feeling like there's something there that needs to be investigated. Hank and Zero are disassembling a Sega Dreamcast to see how it works, and some ghouls hanging out in the back alley are complaining about how difficult it is to hide bodies. On stage, Frank is playing the piano while Dr. Carter discusses with David Pumpkins whether there's any kind of blood magic that can cause garden gnomes to spontaneously appear in your closets. Jeanette and Babette tell stories about Cactus Jack, and the Toreador gossip about Swan's new outfits. And up on the balcony, Divya explains to Nathan the basic tenets of rulership. Make people come to you with their requests. Never let them know what you don't know. Never show anyone how strong you are. As the story gets going, there's a series of little scenes where people show up with different story hooks and different explanations for why players are being pulled off in different directions. Timmy the Evil asks for permission to leave the city to go to some Tremere conclave in Europe, and Nathan gets a letter delivered from Dracula telling him that the time has come for them to face their destiny. He invites him to Chateau Nagpur in the Himalayas. Through Shreknet, Wally gets word that his old friend Roland the Ironheart is summoning him and a bunch of other Nosferatu to Paris. Tony Bagels has a huge blow-off match with Rowdy Roddy Piper and Sting, and hears a strange supernatural call, as if some ancient voice were summoning him past the Rockies and up into the Canadian wilderness. In Italy, Lacroix talks with Chozo about traveling to Hamburg, tells him that he needs to go to a hotel there to meet with the Tremere, who are going to need bodyguard duty on a dangerous assignment going into enemy territory. And in San Francisco, Cassandra has a dream where she speaks to Anatole, the prophet of Gehenna. He tells her that he tried to warn the Inner Council about the coming end times, but they ignored him, mocked him, and locked him up in Toreador jail. He has very nice pajamas provided now, but he's not allowed to leave. He tells her that in Cairo things have gotten very bad, that Beckett and Matilda are there and are in terrible danger. Cassandra tells Anna about her visions, and the two of them decide to get on a plane and fly to Cairo immediately to assist Beckett with his work. All through these scenes, the radios and the televisions, wherever the PCs go, are showing them disturbing indications of unrest. Storms of red rain falling over Shanghai and Rio de Janeiro. Violent riots erupting in Athens and Cairo. People attacking each other and eating their flesh on the streets of Mumbai. Huge storms descending over the Carpathians. In the midst of all of this, the PCs scatter across the world, each one of them heading away from the others and into their own private nightmare. In Canada, the gangrel Xavier has summoned a huge conclave of his clan, and he informs them that he has decided to leave the Camarilla because the Inner Council refuses to believe him about the coming of a great creature, a portent of Gehenna. The monster that he's encountered is the greatest Zamit's war ghoul he's ever seen. It absorbs life all around it and devastates everything it comes in contact with. Now he's assembled as many gangrel as he can and calls on them to abandon the Camarilla and form a great war host to seek out this creature and destroy it before it shatters the Masquerade and brings devastation to the earth. The war host includes more than 60 gangrel, and among them are Tony Bagels, Laszlo, Deacon the Destroyer, and Valak. They travel over a great distance, and eventually they come to a lake where a group of kindred are guarding some sort of compound. The gangrel capture one of these kindred and try to interrogate him, but a horrible one-eyed and many-tentacled creature erupts out of the ground to attack them. Laszlo hurls a canister of napalm at the monster and detonates it with a rifle shot, incinerating it. Eventually, at Xavier's urging, the gangrel descend into the compound, slaughtering more of these unknown kindred as they go deeper into the earth. Here they find that the kindred they're facing are the Baali, summoning a horrific monster through a portal to another world. A battle breaks out, and they quickly kill the Baali before anything else is brought over. Torturing the Baali, they learn that a white-haired man ordered them to create these monsters, and they were happy to oblige, but never learned the man's name. He wanted them to send the monsters to Chicago, and the first thing they summoned, the largest thing, is on its way there now. Taking the form of a great bat swarm, the gangrel war host descends on Chicago, but by the time they arrive, the city is already in chaos. Sirens and gunfire are everywhere, and amongst all the chaos is a gigantic wall of flesh, covered in thousands of eyes and mouths. The Masquerade is shattered. Much of the Chicago skyline is ground into dust. Nikolai and his Tremere summon fire elementals and bolts of lightning to strike against it. After burrowing into the wall of flesh, Valak and Laszlo find the Eye of Hazamil. Valak attempts to tear the eye out of the wall, but is overcome with it, and is forced to drive it into his own eye socket. It seizes control of his body, and he turns on Laszlo. In a brutal fight, Tony Bagels manages to crush the jewel and tear it out of Valak's skull. This destroys the wall of flesh, deflating it into a gelatinous sludge of meat and bone, and it ends the life of Valak. During the battle, Prince Lodin flees into the sewers, and he's fallen on by hordes of werewolves who manage to surround him and shred him apart. And Nikolai, along with most of the other Tremere, are ambushed by Divya, who appears out of the shadows to choke the life from him. At the end, Chicago is left in ruins, covered in flame and rotten flesh.
Just like now!
And those few gangrel who survived the battle depart back into the mountains. In Paris, Wally arrives and meets with Roland, as well as other Nosferatu, Orlok, and Angel Eyes, and a group of Banu Hakim led by Fadlan. On CNN, they can see the battle with the Wall of Flesh, and massive riots breaking out all across India, as ghosts begin to rise from the ground and visibly attack people in the streets. Roland tells them to ignore what they see on the television. They have a more pressing charge. They have been sent here to destroy the Niktuku, Baba Yaga, one of the ancient enemies of the clan Nosferatu. She has laid waste to vast numbers of Zemits in the Carpathians and is working her way west. For the next week, they travel through the wilderness. They find war parties of Nosferatu in frenzy, falling on anything that they see and devouring it without care. Packs of werewolves slain and left on pikes. Entire castles destroyed. Armies of Shlatka slaughtered in the fields. Whole villages razed to the ground. Through the use of his bird spies, Wally manages to make contact with some of the Garu and forge an alliance with them. They are also hunting Baba Yaga, and they join the vampires on their journey east. The werewolves are escorting a totally normal girl, who they say is the key to defeating Baba Yaga. They know this because of an ancient werewolf prophecy, but they refuse to share the details of this prophecy with the kindred. Eventually, they find Baba Yaga's army and fall on it in a massive battle. Baba Yaga animates the trees themselves to fight for her, and the very forest comes to destroy them. Many of the Nosferatu are compelled to drink Baba Yaga's blood and continue to fall into frenzy, turning away from Roland's army and joining the enemies. The werewolves are slaughtered in great numbers, until finally Wally and Roland manage to pin Baba Yaga to the ground. The totally normal little girl, who is not at all creepy or anything disturbing, gives Wally a knife made out of bone and saliva, which burns his hand when he touches it. He uses this knife to strike the final blow against Baba Yaga, destroying her and ending the fight. Once the battle is over, the werewolves turn on Angel Eyes, who during a frenzy had attacked and killed several werewolves, drinking their blood. The Banu Hakim then see a vision of Urshel-Gi, one of their ancient rulers, reanimating on his throne. His voice calls out to them, telling them they're needed in Cairo, and so the Banu Hakim, the Nosferatu, and the Garu separate from each other and head in different directions. On the way to Mumbai, Nathan wakes up on his plane to find that he is in coach and not first class, which he finds highly distressing. A woman in a red dress then turns and speaks to him, telling him that once he's fulfilled the prophecy, he should come to see her in the house under the lion's eyes. Then she tells him he should wake up because his plane is crashing. Nathan wakes up and finds that his plane is crashing, but he is in first class, which he considers overall to be an improvement. As his plane falls to the earth, Nathan leaps out of it, transforms into a gargantuan bat, and descends on the city. On the streets, he finds Nick Knight battling an army of Kuei Jin, and learns that both of them have been summoned here by Dracula. They head north into the mountains, looking for the dragon. The following day, when the sun rises, it emerges blood red, and rain begins to fall from the sky. From now on, the days are nights as well, and vampires can walk freely during both. In the mountains, Nick, Dracula, and Nathan find a gargantuan monster that has risen out of the earth and is laying waste to the countryside. The armies of India and China have sent soldiers, planes, and tanks against it, but they are having no luck in stopping it. The many Ravnos who have come here with Dracula are slowly driven mad. One by one, the Ravnos begin turning on each other, killing and diablerizing all others of their blood. Since their attacks have no effect on the monster, Dracula comes to the conclusion that only by fulfilling the prophecy and becoming the one reformed broken soldier can the three of them defeat it. He declares that since he is the chosen one, he will diablerize both Nick and Nathan. Nick attempts to resist, but Dracula dominates him, then diablerizes him. When he comes to attack Nathan, Nathan uses his dementation to alter Dracula's mind, convincing him that Nathan is actually the chosen one. Believing that it is the only way to save the world, Dracula submits to Nathan's diablerie and is consumed.
There can be only one.
Now Now possessing the knowledge and power of the other two broken soldiers, Nathan sees a sudden schism in time. He can destroy Zapathasura either with his own sword, the Sword of Troil, or with Dracula's sword. If he uses Dracula's sword, he will diablerize the antediluvian and become the founder of his own bloodline, but it will force him into torpor almost immediately, and his family will be left to fend for themselves against the ravages of Gehenna. If he uses the Sword of Troil, he can destroy Zapathasura without diablerizing him, leaving him free to help the rest of his family survive the next few days. But in doing so, he will bring ultimate devastation to the entire clan Ravnos. After considerable equivocation, Nathan decides to strike the antediluvian with the Sword of Troil. He obliterates it, and in an instant all members of clan Ravnos are destroyed all across the earth. After reaching through the cobweb and speaking to Cassandra, he learns of the situation in Cairo, and he leaves the battlefield to head there and help her. In the Carpathian Mountains, Shozo and the Tremere battle through many enemies to reach Sioris, the ancient castle of Clan Tremere, where they first became vampires. Once they reach the castle, they must work their way through a series of traps and puzzles, defeating various wards and curses that keep Sioris protected from intrusion, until eventually they reach the very center of it. Hours pass at the heart of the castle while Timmy the Evil sets up a massive ritual. Timmy explains to Shozo that this ritual will shatter the pyramid of House Tremere, breaking the blood bonds that hold all members of the clan to their founder. It will also break the blood bonds against the gargoyles, which is why so many gargoyles have joined Timmy in this effort, and are here protecting him. He neglects to mention that it will also involve slaughtering all other members of the Council of Seven, the oldest and most powerful members of Clan Tremere, and that they will appear here in fragments, each given a brief opportunity to kill Timmy and his companions before the ritual is completed. In a brutal final fight, the Spectre of Tremere appears and attempts to eradicate Timmy the Evil, but he fails to kill him. With Shozo's help, Timmy manages to survive long enough to utter the last words of the ritual and break the bonds of Sioris. The castle begins to collapse into the earth, and it draws with it the spirits of the Council of Seven. Goratrix, Atreus, Merlinda, Tremere, all of them are dragged down into the infernal hells and burned alive. After a savage battle, only Shozo, David Pumpkins, and the gargoyle Annihilatrix have survived. Annihilatrix teleports away through a portal he opens in the sky, and Shozo and David Pumpkins head back to Italy. In Los Angeles, Divya has disappeared. There are reports of the dead walking through Vienna, storms of blood falling on the Indian subcontinent, typhoons racking the coast of Japan, and now an army of Sabbat is marching up the California coastline, slaughtering thousands on their way to Los Angeles. Enzo struggles to keep control of the city. He organizes police forces to tamp down riots, and he engages in long verbal altercations with the Primogen, most of whom are on the verge of revolt. Using his military contacts, he manages to summon up a wing of bombers to fly out into the desert and drop incendiaries on the Sabbat army. This leaves the Sabbat devastated. Most are incinerated, and those who survive scatter into the desert long before they're able to reach Los Angeles itself. In the midst of an argument with the Primogen, Divya emerges out of the mirror grievously wounded. Only one of her arms is still attached to her body, and her flesh has been lacerated by werewolf claws. The Primogen nearly turn on Divya, angry at her for abandoning the city and also having seen her on television killing members of the Camarilla in Chicago. Divya is nearly fallen on and destroyed before Enzo manages to talk the Primogen down. Divya then drags Enzo with her back through the mirror, a disturbing experience which leaves him shaken and deeply alarmed. Emerging in Rome, Divya and Enzo meet with Lacroix and other Ventru who are planning a coup of the Inner Council. Enzo, who is not considered important enough for anyone to pay attention to, is given a cursed pen and instructions for how to activate it when the time arrives.
They all said the pen was mightier than the sword.
Thanks to me, they were right.
Entering the halls of the Inner Council, Enzo is briefly spoken to by a Malkavian elder who speaks through him to Cassandra, telling her that she's coming to the desert and that Cassandra should bring the daughter to the temple below the cat. While Lacroix and other elders argue, Enzo opens the fountain pen and releases Divya in a cloud of smoke, just as Annihilatrix emerges from a portal in the sky. Divya opens a great well of shadow, and through it comes an army of Sabbat. Lacroix attests that he is shocked to hear that the Sabbat have somehow arrived here in the inner council chamber, and quickly excuses himself from the battle. Most of the members of the inner council are slaughtered in the fray as Divya and Annihilatrix tear through them. At the head of the Sabbat war party, Vilmer engages in a duel with Wulfgar, the ancient gangrel on the inner council, and proves that he is in fact the superior gangrel. With the inner council destroyed, the Ventrue and the Sabbat go their separate ways, retreating across the city. Divya and Enzo travel again back through the void and return to Los Angeles. Cassandra, Anna, and Smiling Jack are on a plane headed to Cairo when ghosts begin attacking the passengers. They manage to hold things together long enough for the plane to land, even though several passengers are pulled through its walls and out into nothingness. Once they reach the airport, they find that the entire city is in the midst of a gigantic riot. After long and incoherent conversations with other Malkavians through the onboard television on the plane, Cassandra determines that she must find the daughter of Eve, who could only be recognized by the birthmark of a moon. She has no idea how to locate her, but thinks that if she does, she should take her to the Sphinx, where apparently other Malkavians are waiting to help her. Here on the runway, they meet an old friend, Matthias. Matthias tells them that a great number of Giovanni are here in the city, and that the ghosts of the dead have begun rising up everywhere, as if they've been untethered from hell, spilling out through the city and attacking the living. With no other leads, the players pursue the Giovanni and eventually meet Matilda, who is also following them. They learn that Matilda and Beckett were ambushed by the Sedites. Beckett was kidnapped, along with a woman who they believe may be the last daughter of Eve, but the Sedites have her now as well. The Giovanni have opened a portal to hell, which is causing the entire city of Cairo to sink into the underworld, and the Banu Hakim have arrived to annihilate everyone. Traveling down the Nile and through the chaotic city, they eventually arrive at a makeshift temple where a large number of Sedites have brought the last daughter of Eve. The woman has recently given birth to a baby with shock red hair, and as the players arrive, the Sedite priests use the baby to summon a gigantic eye to appear in a huge mirror. Anna rushes into the room and seizes the baby, then flees with it. Cassandra unties Beckett, and an army of Banu Hakim fall on the Sedites outside. Meanwhile, the Sedite priests beckon the eye, telling it to come and join them and plunge the world into darkness. The eye looks back at them and says,
No. You join me into what? You follow me to do what?
The players flee across the desert pursued by an army of Sedites, but they're eventually rescued by Nathan. The Sedites begin to go mad. They turn their guns and knives against each other, and then against themselves. They begin to cut their own throats, open their own skulls, and tear out their own hearts. Matthias calls out for help from the players before he turns on himself and tears his own heart from his chest, ending his life, as the Sedites eradicate themselves and their souls drift back to their progenitor in the halls of the dead. With no one left to pursue them, the players walk calmly across the desert to the Sphinx, where they find a group of Malkavians in a small hut. Dr. Carter, Titus, Jurgen, Camilla Baines, and many others have all collected here, and they joined hands together to perform a great dementation of the world, to erase the events of Gehenna out of the mind of mortals, so that the Masquerade can be maintained. Nathan, Cassandra, and Matilda join hands with them and assist them in erasing the events of the last week from the minds of the world. When they return to Los Angeles, Divya orders Enzo to summon the Primogen again so she can punish them for their disloyalty. But before Enzo can do anything, he hears a horrible screeching. Thousands of dead begin to rise up out of the killing pits beneath Divya's mansion, and they begin to swarm around her, grasping her with their ectoplasmic hands. Enzo watches in horror as Divya is slowly pulled down into the ground. Then Enzo hears his own name being screamed at him and sees the ghost of his ghoul, Guillermo, after decades of torment, finally free of Enzo's control. Guillermo locks his spectral hands around Enzo's throat and struggles to choke the life out of him, and both Enzo and Divya are dragged by their victims down into hell. So after a few days, the players have all returned to Los Angeles, those of them who are still alive, and they go through a brief accounting of what they've seen. Although the Masquerade has been restored, and things have to some degree returned to how they were before, the mass dementation that the Malkavians have inflicted on everyone seems to have had some significant impact on society at large. People feel more ill at ease, more suspicious, more tribalized than they were before. The world feels colder and more hostile than it did a few days ago. And there are entire factions of vampires who seem to have vanished. The Inner Council has disappeared, and no one seems to know what happened to them. It also appears that most of the Ravnos, the Setites, and the Giovanni have been wiped out in the fighting. Here in Los Angeles, order has somewhat returned, but there is no one in charge. Divya has vanished, Enzo has vanished, and as far as anyone can tell, it appears that both of them are dead. And so after a long conversation between the player characters and the various important NPCs in the city, they eventually come to the conclusion that the logical person to put in command of the city is Nathan. Although Nathan is highly reluctant to take charge, partially because he doesn't really want to be prince or to be given that responsibility, and also because he's largely depressed about having lost so many of his friends, as well as having lost Divya, all in this massive battle. But reluctantly, Nathan agrees to be named prince. A new Primogen Council is assembled, new barons are assigned, and the city goes back to normal. He assigns Bertram his seneschal with the understanding that Bertram will do all of the actual work of running the city, since Nathan really doesn't have any desire to do that, and he appoints Max Hammer, Mirsheen, and Tony Bagels as 3 sheriffs, dividing the giant LA territory between them. He also lifts various restrictions and banishments, allowing Cassandra and Anna to return to LA, and for the Anarchs, who have largely been driven out of San Francisco by Lacroix's army, to come down into Los Angeles and form their own territories there as well, where they are welcome, as long as they agree to follow the rules. And so the remaining members of the Bompensero family are united again, and the city of Los Angeles is, for now and for as long as they can hold on to it, their domain. And that was the end of the campaign. I've been a game master for a pretty long time. I had been running games for about 10 years before I started this campaign, and I don't think I could have run a campaign like this without, a significant amount of experience. But I was, and I still am, just extremely pleased at the end of it all with how the campaign turned out. It's the longest game I've ever ran. We ran for 2 years. I think it was close to 100 sessions that we had at the end of it. Sessions probably around 5 to 6 hours, so that's like 500 to 600 hours of game that I ran for this campaign, which is a lot of game. It stretched over like 80 years of California and American history, and we went through hundreds of NPCs and hundreds of storylines and hundreds of quests, and although there were, ups and downs, overall I feel like it just went exceptionally well. I mean, I had a portrait commissioned of the player characters. Obviously, I was pleased with it. And I really enjoyed running it, and I've really enjoyed now, it's been about 2 years since the campaign wrapped, I've really enjoyed the long and protracted process of relating all of this in these videos. I don't know how many people other than my players actually really watch these videos, but if anyone likes them, I'm glad, and obviously I do them primarily because they're fun to remember, and because my players seem to get very excited whenever I make one. Now that the campaign is over, I will probably do other videos about other games and campaigns. To everybody who played in and took part in the campaign, thank you for all of your contributions, and for anybody who enjoys the videos, thank you for watching. That is Vampire the Masquerade, and that is it for me.
I will stay here with Divya until her body is turned to ashes and then commit them to the wind. I may even say a prayer.